The enlargement towards Eastern European countries has been recently and repeatedly mentioned as a new priority by the EU establishment. While the previous enlargements were about democratization, economic prosperity and stability in Europe, this new enlargement process has geopolitical interest and security at heart. But what are the real expectations of societies that have now embarked on the path of EU integration regarding the question of EU enlargement and integration? How is the EU actually perceived there? We will speak with our two guests about the perspective on EU enlargement from Moldova and Bosnia and Herzegovina, two peripheral countries that have quite recently acquired EU candidate status. Our guests, each with a unique perspective on this issue, are Moldovan sociologist Vitalie Sprinceana and Bosnian and Herzegovinian literary theorist Damir Arsenijević.
Hello everybody, we are here again to discuss the issues related to the European Union, the functioning of European Union, and also today the integration and enlargement process of the European Union, and particularly from the peripheral perspective. And today I have here two interesting guests, as we know already, and that is Bosnian and Herzegovinian guest, who is Damir Arsenijević, and his Moldovan colleague, Vitalie Sprinceana. And these are actually our two guests, which are going to give us their takes about current plans of the European Union to enlarge based on the geopolitical agenda. There is a huge change in the integration process in the EU. There is a huge change related to the war in Ukraine and all the geopolitical changes which we are witnessing. And one of them is indeed enlarge the European Union, not based on the economic prosperity and other agendas, but rather on the agendas related to the security and geopolitics. But we also want to know what the Moldovan and Bosnian and Herzegovinian societies are thinking about the enlargement and the integration in the EU, and what are the issues they are actually facing today. So first, the question I would ask our both guests, the question which is more general, which is related to the idea of European integration and enlargement related to the Balkans and Moldova, within the context which we are witnessing, meaning the context of European security crisis, substantial transformation of the European Union itself, and the talks about the geopolitics instead of prosperity, human rights, and all other issues which were related usually to the European Union. So my question would be, how actually you think your societies, and of course institutionally ruling class, but also societies at large, see this kind of new trend. We know that the enlargement is long time here, but now it gets new dynamics. So what you think about this process, and how actually from the perspective, and now I will ask first Damir, from the perspective of Bosnia and Herzegovina, how you evaluate the situation itself?
Well, I think it's really interesting to think about. So, what's new about Europe from a Bosnian perspective? I mean, if the war in Ukraine is something new, and if Europe is kind of shifting more towards the war type economy and it needs more resources, I think, come from Bosnian perspective and from the war against Yugoslavia that was waged, from the early 90s, Europe was unable to really answer the security threats. I think it got very complacent with the end of history, the story of this kind of perennial liberal democracy. It has won, but actually it neglected to see that the war in Yugoslavia was a symptom that the future was sending the message, what the future was going to be like. So, and I'm particularly thinking here about the role of right-wing paramilitaries fighting in Yugoslavia. So even what's kind of very current now, we're talking about the resolution in the UN about the genocide in Srebrenica. and it's now being reduced to various ethnicities. But, we are forgetting that Golden Dawn members were in Srebrenica, that, various Russian paramilitaries were there. So Srebrenica genocide was the exercise, in my view, of the far right, how to wage the future war. And it was given this polygon to test it. So what is the novelty of this kind of situation? The EU always had these kind of geopolitics and security questions, but it was complacent, and it was letting these far-righters as either marginal groups or doing the dirty jobs for particular elites. Now, the novelty is that the far right is on the rise in Europe. And now Europe needs to answer the necessities of its own market. So Europe is constantly, either by not taking the refugees in the 90s, or taking very few refugees in the 90s and treating them like they were scum and putting them in de facto concentration camps. Now it's reversing. It's creating this because of its not just electricity hunger that we'll be talking about, what's happening under the guise of the Green New Deal, but it's sucking out labor force so that countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina don't have any doctors, don't have any nurses, don't have anything else, all the whilst being isolated in a ghetto surrounded by Europe. So it is hell surrounded by this so-called EU paradise, which is what's happening now. Bosnia got accession talks, and now this is some sort of an opportunity with a so-called new growth plan for the Western Balkans, which is puny amounts of money for achieving anything. So it's more cosmetic. Nothing fundamentally will really change, because you have Montenegro that's been negotiating for over a decade. They're still years away from being prepared to join the EU. And the EU, even in its own terms, has failed to kind of create certain financial incentives, like for memberships in the EU single market, that would make some sort of reforms meaningful. So even within their own stupendous bureaucratic agenda, they can't deliver, let alone to make something substantial. So what you have in the population, you have this kind of cynicism, well, nothing has changed. All the while, you have our increasingly authoritarian ethnic elites having the time of their lives, because they're thriving on this kind of bargaining. Are they going to, for instance, in Republika Srpska tomorrow, there is on the National Assembly agenda, the law on foreign agents, like the one adopted in Georgia recently. And are these nationalists going to try to milk the EU for the maximum and to try to present themselves as big players? All the while, you have poverty, you have the European Union treating people from Bosnia as really low-class citizens, and being countries of the so-called Western Balkans being ghettoized and being treated as a political dump, economic dump, and environmental dump.
Okay, we will move to this topic, I think, in a short while, but I would ask now Vitalie what he thinks from the Moldovan perspective. I will just remind that today it's 21st of May, and Moldova just today undersigned a new partnership with the European Union about, and now I will quote here, security and defense partnership, EU-Moldova. So there is clearly this geopolitical defense and other issues on the table.
Yeah, thank you. I think Damir has set the stage perfectly. So I'll try to avoid repeating some of the things that he said that are similar to Moldova. But I would refer to a line that he mentioned at least 2 times about, in a way, like discussing about this newness of the process. There is a Moldovan saying that kind of relates what he said about like things are changing, but they're remaining the same. So in a way, I think that kind of summarizes the whole debate and the whole process. It's in a way, because the logic of the process is geopolitical, and because the logic of the process is not related to any whatever radical and profound transformations that Moldova will undergo. So this is kind of gives both to the society and to the elites the feeling that things will change for the purpose of reports delivered to Brussels, and maybe Brussels will have their interest to assess or to record some change, but on the ground nobody will care what is it really changing something, is it really transforming in the way that it is intended to be, and so on and so forth. I think for the elites, in a way, this is a good news, because they'll continue to do the same thing that they have done, but also with some added bonuses. Like one of them is that this we consider it as almost fallen from above. Like it's like something that just like fell from the sky, this whole process, and the acceleration, the speed and everything, which is totally different from, like, for example, what Damir was saying, like, and other Balkan countries being given like the candidacy or the offer in the 2000s and still having to wait. With Moldova is different. Like everything is moving at a very, very huge speed. So in a way, this EU integration process gives the Moldovan elites this new national idea. In the absence of anything meaningful that they can offer, now there is this huge project, and it involves, as they say, the transformation of the country, joining something. So basically, it solves for them very easily the whole transition. Basically, it was not meaningless. It had an end, it had a goal at the end of it, and that goal was at times invisible, difficult to kind of discern, but now it's there, and as a recognition for the efforts that we did, basically now we are given this kind of recompense, which is like really problematic, because the transition in Moldova was really, I think, is probably one of the harshest. I'm not comparing now suffering, but it's like one of the harshest. The bad news for the elites is that the process is totally not dependent on them. So it's basically a process controlled by Brussels, and Brussels decides what is the progress. Brussels might decide at one point to rotate or swap partners and to identify new political forces that, in the eyes of Brussels, are more suitable to do this, for example, under the form of various anti-corruption campaigns, and like dismissing the bad leaders and replacing them with new ones, and so on and so forth. For the society, to put it like to cut it shortly, because I can talk about that. For the society, in a way, is the same. It's kind of, things are also under the same umbrella, because in a way things will be the same. The way the process is going now, it's a guarantee that things will not change. That like the so-called Moldovan democracy, which is like an elite rule with very little popular participation, will remain in place and nobody will challenge it. The European process is totally not challenging it, because up until now it's driven by the elites. It's a top-down approach. It's totally non-transparent, and it's totally kind of how to put it, there is no public oversight of the whole process. And this is combined with the fact that Moldova has a very limited leverage power to influence whatever like they're negotiating. I think there are many voices in Moldova that fear that this whole EU accession process will be not negotiation, but in a way capitulation, which will mean like Moldova will sign whatever just because, and probably it's already a common thing in a way, but for us, one of like, they're still, as weak and as poor and as small as Moldova is, there are still some areas that are very sensible to the Moldovan public. For example, as like Damir mentioned, like Bosnia being transformed into an ecological dump. So there is, in a way, Moldova is this reserve labor force that is exploited. And like, this is a very sensible topic. We're still one of the kind of most rural countries in Europe, if it's not the most rural. That's also kind of creates huge sensibilities for agriculture and how that will be negotiated. So that's in a way, and to add something else, there is also the everyday experience of the people with the European integration and the EU itself, because as it happens, the Moldova case is special. Moldova, in a way, is only now starting the EU accession process, but through Romanian passports, a lot of Moldovans have already been living in the EU. They have already experienced. We have this visa-free regime, and like to give you a paradox, because in a way, like the rhetoric and the discourses of huge powers, of huge actors, can be also seen, the duplicity of them, once you like encounter them on a daily basis. And like Moldovans with Moldovan passports are supposed to stay only like in EU legally only 90 days out of 180 days or something like that. But there is no problem, like, and there is this whole discourse like security, increasing control of the borders, whatever. But there is no problem if you overstay, if you extend your stay. You just come to the Hungarian border when you're leaving the Schengen zone. Now it has moved to Romania, because Romania is becoming part of this kind of land Schengen area or whatever. And just like you pay 100 euros to the border officer, and that's solved. And you can go in EU next day. So people already see that beneath this kind of facade, which a pretense of like rule of law and strict procedures and other type of practices that we encounter in our countries, you can find things that are very, in a way, similar. So that would be kind of my very short answer to the question.
Okay, let's move now back to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Damir, you are, and in your expertise, you are interested in the topic which you call as waste colonialism, which is related to the also to the European Union policy. Unfortunately, you are calling it as the continuation of war by different means, and you are showing actually that it is a international finance capital who is involved in this process. And I also wonder how much it is also European finance capital, and what does the European Union what is doing in this process, European Union, since we know that the European Union has now two new pillars, let's call it new pillars. Okay, one is the geopolitical defense and all these issues, and our second is so-called green transition. And the talks about how the European Union becomes to be technological superpower, changing all the climate issues, and how it will invest in green technologies and in green transformation. So I would like to know, what is your take out about this, and how you expect what will be the New York of the European Union within the process which you call waste colonialism, in the case that the Bosnia and Herzegovina will be successfully integrated to the European Union. So maybe you could start with the description of the situation now, and then what you expect would happen with this process.
Sure, but I really want to go back to what Vitalie said about paying 100 euros to a border guard. That is going to save us. Like, this is going to be the human touch against the idiotic bureaucracy. I mean, this is where one of this is what I'm hopeful about. Like, you know, that this kind of small scale human corruption is just going to be the great against this terribly brutal bureaucratic machinery that's grinding lives, you know. So that's my glimmer of hope, whatever it is. When it comes to the European Green Deal, this is the geopolitics of Europe, I think. You know, this is the 0 point ideological level of geopolitics of Europe. Why am I saying this? Because it is kind of insidiously washing away the industrial strategy of the Europe and the need to strengthen the EU supply chains. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because there is a huge onslaught. Currently, we are having a huge onslaught in the Western Balkans, but Serbia in particular and Bosnia, in which you have the extraction of lithium, and huge reserves of lithium are being found, or various metals are being found, and When I started working on waste colonialism, I started working on it as the European capital, or the international finance capital, but companies from the EU coming, privatizing former industrial giants, cutting up all the value and metals, extracting everything worthwhile from it, taking mortgages on the land and stuff, and then sucking out that capital out of the country, leaving huge unemployments, leaving skeletons of former factories, leaving people unemployed, and leaving toxic materials there for communities to be poisoned. So rather than, like Germany and all various other countries, they export their trash to third world countries. This is the new type of waste colonialism. When you just go suck everything out, leave the toxins, communities die, they're sick, they need to buy medicine, they can't afford treatment. So you create, it's not even a class, it's like almost like a subspecies of ill people who are forced to accept the lowest paid, most menial jobs on this free kind of labor capital. And on top of everything, it's not just about the accumulation value, but realization value. Every little cent that they earn, they will have to spend buying expensive medicines. So this is how they get triple washed from capital, through their bodies and their lives, and then they are disposable people. So the question of wasting is at the core. There is, and this is what I'm working on, and that's my thesis, that waste is the social value, and the process of wasting creates very particular type of value in this conglomerate of authoritarian ethno-nationalism and international finance, and how people are not just wasting their lives, but how in this deeply anti-social political project that we are living now, that the EU is part of through this kind of mutant capitalism now, right? People are being kind of washed and rewashed, and capital is being extracted from them constantly, and they're being wasted. Communities are wasted. Human relationships are wasted. So wasting produces value for this order, for people to feel alone, powerless, and completely helpless. And this is produced constantly and maintained. And this kind of privatization of factories, extracting resources, creating ill populations is the way of doing it. Now, if you have part of this kind of green European Green Deal, wanting to strengthen supply chains for these minerals. And this is important for Europe to have as part of its industrial strategy, to open exploratory places elsewhere that is not in Europe. You have a situation now that we have the opening of mine pits without any consultations with local communities. I'm on the phone talking to people whose houses are just on the brink of getting destroyed because, there are this huge machinery of Adriatic metals coming and just kind of pumping over. There are embassies like Norwegian embassy calling NGOs, telling them not to raise a big noise about this kind of exploitation, right? Like, Nordic green countries, right? I mean, we all know what kind of terrors they do back in their own home. So you have, under the guise of the rule of law, you have foreign countries pushing for the adoption of the laws that are going to lower any sort of environmental standards for the exploration of rare earths, minerals, etc., etc. So this is sold as democratization, right? So this is the problem. So we are having another onslaught. It's another attack, and just like we were the losers of this transition into capitalism through privatization, through mass graves and concentration camps and property transformation, we are going to be the losers of this green transition, because the green transition is in effect colonialism for this electricity hunger of Europe on the one hand, and on the other hand, of this need for Europe to position itself geopolitically, strategically in relation to big power players. So rather than talking about this kind of Green New Deal, European Green Deal as something that's maybe like good thing, actually I would rather look at it as the 0 point of ideology for ruthless geopolitical extraction of the EU in relation to all these peripheral countries.
So this was not very optimistic, but I think at least me as person who is from the Central East Europe, I can understand this kind of skepticism very well, including this beginning joke about the nice face of human corruption with €100. Fine, but I will now ask Vitalie. I know this is a bit a cliche question, but I wanted to ask this question because I think that whoever reads something about what is going on in Moldova in mainstream media, you usually listen or read something that Moldovan society is polarized, that there are pro-Moscow, pro-Russian groups, and then there are these good pro-European guys who have these visions. So I would like to ask, because you are a sociologist, actually ask you the question, how is the reality really of Moldovan politics and Moldovan society? Is it so that Moldova is really so polarized about its let's say geopolitical identity, because this is about more construction of identity than anything else, or it is much more settled kind of not so bipolar, relation?
Well, I'll first answer bluntly, and then I'll use a metaphor put forward again by Damir. I like continuing other people's thoughts. So I would say that, of course, the country is not divided along these lines, but attempts are being made to kind of construct this division. And I like Damir's discussion about this waste colonialism, and to use that metaphor, in a way, this is also a kind of conceptual waste that is being kind of projected upon very complex societies like the Moldovan ones, in order to kind of, to represent, to kind of understand them, but also to create a reality on the ground. And this is really deeply, deeply problematic, because in many ways, and Damir already pointed to kind of to this structural process of peripheralization, like to a large extent, Moldova is a very normal and typical society for a periphery, and especially a periphery in a very specific circumstances, where like it was transformed in 30 and something years from a, let's put it, industrial country into something that is not clear, but we use very often this word of demodernization in order to explain what's happening in the country, among other things. So on the other hand, this kind of whole trope or narrative, or I don't know how to put it, the discourse about the country being divided, it functions very well both as an explanatory scheme, very convenient one, and as a kind of very useful political tool. In terms of explanatory situation, it gives which is used not only by I think in this way you can really see a kind of self-colonization of the Moldovan political discourse, because we are not the originators of this discourse, but we're very proud to reproduce it. Whatever you read in The Guardian, or I must say that even in media outlets that would be more sensitive to realities on the ground, like Le Monde Diplomatique, for example. I am following the French version, and they're known for being sensible and understanding the complexities on the ground. But for example, most of the pieces that I've seen of Moldova, they're still kind of reproducing this. So in this sense, Moldovan kind of public discourse reproduces that happily. And this discourse is then used also by other international actors, the EU, the US, and it's we understand how this is convenient for the US and the EU. It kind of creates a very good image of themselves, as if they're projecting such a huge power of attraction that kind of splits countries that are either fascinated or hated. But of course, the realities on the ground are much more complex. It's Moldovan society is split, among other things, on the class lines. There is huge inequality, and it's growing. And there are many other, the countries increasingly depopulating. The standards of life are kind of stable in the falling trend, kind of. So there are numbers and estimates, and we can play with figures, and they're always lying. And about this divide between East and West, it becomes also a very useful political tool, because it helps political elites to transform any political debate, conflict, issue, any discussion about economics, about the what type of economy we're building, what type of society we're building, into a geopolitical clash. It also gives you a very nice excuse. If something doesn't work, it's not that you don't do things properly, or that you did not have a good plan to start with, or something like that. But it's because of the insidious and very perverse work that the Russians, for example, are doing. And also that, because I would like also to refer to a thing that Damir said in the beginning. I think that the recent trend into with these foreign laws, foreign agent laws regarding civil society organizations, in many ways are a reflection of that, and are connected to that. And I'm saying that this divide gives the politicians also the instrument to divide people and to say you are loyal and you are traitors if you are siding with that. And of course, there is a problem, and there is a very nice article in the Leftist about the foreign agents law in Georgia, that on the one hand, there is legitimate anger towards the outsized role that some NGOs are playing in the political kind of structure situation. You have NGOs that are basically substituting the people and popular participation and debate. And they're very close to the government, they're very close to IMF, World Bank, and all these bodies. And there is an anger directed against them. And because there is no other language to express it, for example, lack of popular participation, and why there is no democratic process in the decision-making kind of process of the country, because of that, other groups are using also this instrument of loyal versus traitors, and are being and they're using this as a fight to do that, and it's a very distorted situation in the end. So I think it's a very toxic discourse, which is basically some zombie categories that are very convenient for. I'm not blaming the Western media. I understand how problematic is it. In the conditions of neoliberalism, when nobody gives you any resources to have correspondence on the ground to report sensibly, I understand how difficult is it to go somewhere get out of the plane and to describe a country. But that's not an excuse for such a bad journalism that comes with the schemas, and just in so many years, somebody has to challenge that. And it's very difficult to counter this kind of the influence of these narratives, because you're a small, very weak kind of, I'm talking, for example, about ourselves, our initiatives. We're a small media, left-wing media organization. We write mostly in Romanian because this is our audience, and we want to talk with our kind of citizens, with our communities. And then it's difficult to counteract these huge narratives that are coming everywhere via the public discourse, via various think tanks that reproduce it, via like governmental policies that make reference to that, via various bad exercises in sociology and public opinion polls that kind of measure it and create this reality. So it's a very toxic language being imposed in an otherwise very sophisticated context. And that would be my kind of very short answer. I hope it was short.
Yes, it was short, and it definitely gave us some idea that it's not so easy how it sounds. We are moving to the last question, which is again the common question. And me, as coming from the Czech Republic originally, as you know, we were accepted 2004. And recently, there is an increasing voices in the society which are very skeptical towards the European Union. We are generally very skeptical in all political things. That's the typical Czech thing. So it's not like because of the European Union only, but also because of the European Union. And, you know, when we were accessing, there was a lot of this optimism about what will happen, how we will move towards this Western prosperity. We will be modernized and we will live like in Austria and Germany, with the Austrian and German salaries, but we still didn't reach it after 20 years, and we are very far from it to reach it, honestly said. So how looks your like intra-social discussion in your countries about the possibilities of the membership to the European Union? Are there some realistic voices or critical voices who are saying, okay, there are pluses and there are minuses. It's not all black, but it's also not white. And the most important thing, which I think nobody told us, and we should start to tell your population, is nobody will do anything for you. Nobody. You can have this money from the European Union, but if you don't do the job yourself, they will not solve your problems for yours. Any of these problems. So it's kind of belief, you know, there is this Deus ex machina who comes and solve the problems. It will not happen, and you will sink in the frustration because of it then in the future. So is there some realistic voices? Is there some kind of realistic discussion about what the membership would be meaning for the country and for the society? I will first ask Damir to answer this question if there is some kind of answer for it.
Well, I mean, I very much like this whole kind of heuristic that Vitalie gave about these kind of zombie categories and how they have colonized and how they are devouring public space and almost kind of public air to have any sort of, they oversaturate the time and space, and you know, this is debilitating, and this is the toxicity when both space and time are colonized for thought. Then you know, you fall back to these grand zombie categories because it's easier, right? You know, oh well, this is, and as Vitalie said, if everything is geopolitics, then you know, you can't question what kind of quality of life do you want to have, why you can't afford to live on a meager salary that you receive, why is it that the only hope that your children have is to leave the country, right? You know, why is this kind of, it's like capital is dead labor, you know, why is the only hope that you can have is to run away from where you live, and why is that produced? And on top of everything, then you have another layer of zombie categories, and now it's going to be June, and I very often say, you know, it's June and anthropologists are in bloom, so you have like swathes of anthropologists coming to interpret from all over the world, like, you know, to work on your post-conflict transitional societies and understand what it is. So there is no realistic discussion on the side of the EU. The EU can do hologram projection of the EU flag on buildings. It can invest in little EU flags to celebrate this. It can give you the most common places and empty, vacuous, insulting kind of words that don't have anything to do with the reality. So we know what the EU is, and we have known since the 90s what the EU has been. I don't think that people have any sort of kind of rosy picture of what Europe is. They know that, you know, they have to go to Germany and share a flat with 5 other people to be able to afford some sort of a menial job, to be at least able to send little money back home. This is what EU is. You know, it's kind of Saudi Arabia on just a smaller scale when it comes to the extraction of labor, you know, by Indian workers. So it's I mean, you know, it's the same principle. So so how do you then critique when you have a huge machinery being used to, and of course the EU negotiates with these authoritarian ethnic elites who committed crimes during the war to be in power, right? I mean, nobody is challenging that. I mean, you're having under the guise of even human rights. I mean, like, even that is abandoned. I mean, human rights is the most idiotic concept, which gives you the only position of disillusioned victim, and you can speak only as a disillusioned victim and nothing more. So even that is abandoned, right? Nobody, even the EU doesn't believe in this. It's just kind of realpolitik, blunt, to the point, and so realistic and critical view on the EU in a public discourse you don't have, because you are being exhausted on so many levels, and you are being kind of devoured by these zombie categories, that any sort of inkling of doing something else, not only is it dismissed, it doesn't have anything to fall on, and that EU reproduces inequalities. You know, of course it is known, and you know, this is what the populist parties ride on. This is how they maintain themselves in power, and they are the collocutors of the EU. So, you know, it's the closed mechanism, it's the closed circuit. The game is beautifully set up, it's rigged, and even if any sort of little opposition you try to develop, you are either dismissed as a lunatic, or as a, you know, as a communist, of course. Then, you know, the various, in this kind of anti-communist hysteria that the EU is, you know, is the EU, of course, is paying the price for equating communism and fascism, and this is coming it's the payback time. But of course, those who are going to pay back are the poor people and the underclass of the EU, who are just going to be slaughtered for this kind of ideological leveling, sadly. And, you know, but I think therein lies the way to really think about what would be the progressive politics, homegrown. And I'm so glad that we are now talking. You know, I'm sad to have met Vitalie only now, because, you know, it would have been great to have had this kind of discussion many years ago, many months ago, to see the trajectories and to see what kind of border guards we can meet to stay to stay longer in the EU and to bypass the system.
Okay, now Vitalie, the floor is yours about this question. Is there realistic and critical discussion about the EU future in Moldova?
Well, we have this kind of joke, kind of truth, kind of sad irony, that the EU delegation, for example, works more as an advertising agency than kind of information outlet about the EU. And I'm not referring only to the official website of the EU delegation, which is something else. But there used to be, and EU still funds a variety of media initiatives that kind of are promoting the EU. And the level of this promotion is really, I don't know, it's like, I don't want to be diminutive and to be pejorative towards some religious minorities that are so religious groups that are using these rosy pictures about the paradise that will come after, but it's in a way like that. Unfortunately, and there's there are several things to mention alongside that. On the one hand, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of one of the main aspects of this process now is that a lot of Moldovans already know EU and basically know what is EU. So basically, those that kind of wanted to live there are already in EU, trying to make a life as starting, most of them, of course, doing, as it's called in sociology, downward mobilization, which means degradation of deprofessionalization and so on, and starting from much lower position than they were before. If they were doctors in Moldova, they would start as janitors in EU. So a lot of them kind of have taken this path. So in a way, the question would be what is the EU integration can offer to those that want to stay and make a life in Moldova? And as it happens, it's probably the most honest answer will be not much. On the one hand, and I guess there is this paradox that a lot of the political discourse is connected to this idea that, okay, now with the EU kind of negotiations, there is also this huge inflow of resources through the pre-accession funds that will come to Moldova. As it happens, I just looked before this discussion. I was looking through the chapters where they're calling them windows or areas of finance of this mechanism, and in a way, it's funny enough to discover that most of these areas, or in most of these areas, already there have been significant investments from various actors, EU being probably the main one. For example, the so-called rule of law. There is, I think, we're not sure about if the universe has a kind of a limit or not, but we are sure that the process of reforming Moldovan justice has no end. And it was already had absorbed a ton of money, and it can absorb millions and millions and billions of euros additionally, and will not do anything, will remain the same. The capacity of, in a way, of resilience of the system is amazing. And of course, most of these chapters, or areas in the pre-accession funds, they're not directed towards kind of, I don't know, let's put it this way, real ordinary people. It's several chapters that kind of don't benefit at all, or only infinitesimally, very abysmally, indirectly, the citizens. It's from security, which means enforcing borders, and as Damir already pointed out, I'll not point this the so-called green or whatever, which is another business kind of scheme that was presented as the green agenda. Competitiveness and inclusive growth, it would be probably continuing exploitation of labor force. So in a way, basically the current EU integration will be just continuing, but maybe also accelerating and deepening and aggravating some of the processes that are already taking place. And it's a huge problem because, of course, in a way, we Moldovans were connected forcefully to various debates about EU. It was a totally foreign discussion for us. It was something that we were used to think that if that will happen decades maybe. So of course we're not prepared, but we're following the discussions within the EU, and we're seeing how long are some of the discussions with no solution. For example, the discussion about the democratic deficit. It's still a huge problem in EU, and we have, in a way, this democratic deficit also within the country, and we understand that it will not get solved. On the contrary, it will get amplified by creating another distance, which would be even larger. So now you have between the citizenry and the ruling class, and then you will have between the citizenry and some people in Brussels, and that's one of the things that will totally not change. And there are many things as a cultural worker, because besides being sociologist by training, I'm a cultural worker by my practice. I'm following, for example, what is happening in the field of culture. Creative Europe means basically neoliberalization of culture, and that is coming with like in very accelerated rhythm, and like the kind of the colonization of the culture by economics is not only kind of will be protected in the EU. Actually, the EU kind of drives it and accelerates it. So in many ways, like when I'm looking at, and that is about many other areas. So I think that's why this is relevant, is not only just kind of to be able to understand the complexity and the fact that probably will not change, and like to devise the strategy accordingly. Like as Damir said, like let's invent ways to somehow bypass or resist or like be resilient in face of that, because it will be like that. But also maybe to try to anticipate some of the big frictions in the future, at least what is possible, like to anticipate that there will be huge delusion. As I said, like the fact that now, for example, everybody pictures Moldova as a battlefield between the East and the West comes with the downside, which is very dangerous. Like in case things don't work, and they will necessarily not work, who will be blamed? Like EU will be blamed, and then you'll have another populist regime, probably tolerated and funded by the EU to defend the external border. So we'll have kind of another, I don't know, Poland or whatever, and that again, it doesn't sound very optimistic. But if you're looking for optimism, just go to the website of the EU delegation in Moldova or read other types of media. So my assessment is in a way that it's kind of, it's a very difficult, challenging, and full with uncertainties process. And we already can guess that some of the developments would really very harmful. What is to be done? There is already kind of beyond the kind of the topic of the discussion, but kind of starting at least to have these common conversations, because we did not have them before. We're more connected to activists, for example, and scholars in Brussels than to activists in countries that are undergoing similar situations. And that's like, for example, between us and Bosnia, there is almost no connection. But between us and, for example, the Ukrainians, there was almost no connection. Everything goes through Brussels. And that's like, I wouldn't, it's essential, but we're not having this. So I imagine like a first step would be like, let's restore these connections, let's restore these conversations, let's build spaces for alternatives, let's kind of defend also these spaces. But that, as I said, like it's the topic of another discussion.
Yes, I thank you both for your opinions and analysis of situation in your both countries, because I think it's very important to know, even we were not optimistic, but I am afraid the time of optimism is gone. That ended somewhere between 2004 and 2008, unfortunately, for peripheral countries in Europe, actually. So unfortunately, we are in this stage. And I absolutely agree, and we are glad that we did this podcast, because we, in our project 100 Shades of the European Union, this was one of the points we made. We made point that the periphery should talk with each other, support each other, try to create alternative visions and alternative programs. They shouldn't go only to the core. It means to Brussels, Germany, or whatever, but they should communicate with each other. So I thank you for your time. My name is Veronika Sušová-Salminen, and I greet all our listeners, and I will look forward our next talk. Thank you very much and goodbye.